sorry. I don't speak any German. I could try, but I think that would be painful for me and you. But as I said, I've been doing content work on the internet for almost 20 years. And in the last maybe 2 years, we've had a lot of this concept come out about short, shareable pieces of content. Things that organizations or individuals, started with individuals obviously, just human beings putting pieces of content out. You send it to your friends, they spread it around. You get a lot of notoriety, a lot of people looking at you for that. Organizations want to do that same thing. So a lot of the marketing or internet marketing focus recently has been on how can we make our content these small little bite-sized pieces that can go all over the internet and become a meme and get all sorts of attention for our organization. And people talk about that like it's this big new concept that nobody's ever thought of before, that having short pieces of content is something that we're really going to have to think about in a whole different way. But when you really look back at communication structures as humans, that's our natural way of sharing things, little short pieces of content that people can remember. So I was just at the Swiss National Museum yesterday, and I'm looking at all of the religious paintings and iconography. There, back in the 14th century, they had, here's a painting that meant a lot. The message was there, a short little piece of content that people walked by on their way into the church, that they understood exactly what that message was. The Renaissance Christians were very good at messaging, let me tell you, even without having a lot of words besides the Bible to talk about. But even back to the Greeks, people were selling little stories. But in the last 100 years or so, as organizations became industrialized and had to start sharing content about their work, had to start branding things, had to start advertising and trying to get customers, entice customers, the way content was created started changing a bit into sort of a long article format. Now that happened in addition because of the printing press, obviously, and the growth of news media. So people started talking about, here's an article. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end. Here's a brochure. Here's my introduction. Here's some more information, and here's an end. All of these things come together. I give it to you. That's the end of the conversation. I'm the organization. You're the people. Buy my product or not. At least for content's sake. So this is what's comfortable to most organizations. Most organizations are very comfortable writing news-like articles. When they put a piece of content on their website, again, it's an article, probably 5 to 8 paragraphs long, and there's a beginning, a middle, and an end. So when they start trying to do these little snackable pieces, the organization isn't set up for that. The organization is used to having an article that goes, somebody writes it, you give it to somebody to review it, they give it to their boss to look at that, everybody signs off on it, and eventually it gets published on the internet. Snackable content, we can't do that. We can't do these short little bits and have it happen with six reviewers involved. We can't send it back up and have everybody bless it. We have to do it quicker. And not all, just one little short piece of distinction, not all snackable content or not all shareable content is short. There's a lot of really great long pieces of shareable content. Those can take more consideration. But when we're talking about tweets, blog posts, conversations that we're having with customers online in real time, there can't be these big long chains of review. I actually sat in a customer's office a few months ago, and they had someone post something negative about their organization on Facebook. It took them 2.5 hours to respond to that, because first they had to decide who was the appropriate person to respond to it. Then they had to write the response, send it to the legal team, send it to 3 other people, and make sure that that was an okay response to put on there. It was 1 sentence. That's going to make your snackable, shareable content very difficult to continue to do things that way. So when our organizations who are not used to doing these little short bursts and these multi-communication or conversational pieces of content, when they start trying to do that, they get this. They get junk food. This is not a healthy snack. We want our snacks to be, our snackable pieces of content, to procure healthy conversations with our users. And instead these are called ghetto fries. If you've never been to the US, these are ghetto fries. They are French fries with barbecue sauce and onions and cheese.
and they're disgusting, except for 2 in the morning after you've been out to the bar. Then they're fantastic. But they're not good for you, no matter what you do. So most organizations, because they're not used to doing these short, shareable pieces of content, they wind up with this junk food. Or worse, they wind up with really boring, the equivalent of white rice as a snack, just really boring blah pieces of content, because they're trying to be very safe, because they don't have time to get the reviews, the legal reviews and things like that. So we have junk food, content that's not very high quality, or we have boring. Neither one of those are shareable, because no matter what, bad content won't get shared, no matter how hard you work on it. So organizations tend to think that, okay, we're going to do short pieces of content, and that'll be great. We're going to get on Twitter, because it's easy. We can do things very quickly. We can do it quick, cheap, and easy, because there's no barrier to entry. There's no big technology system that needs to do it, to set up a blog or a Twitter feed. So what's the problem? This should be pretty easy. But as we were talking about, it's anything but easy, because we have to do things very intentionally so that all of the content works together and works towards your brand. And by doing this, we have to change the whole structure of how the communication organization within your organization, the communication department within your organization works to make the snackable content realistic and quality. So things need to change a bit within the organization. We have to go from this comfortable way of doing things to something that's slightly new and different as an organizational model. And there's a great book, and it's called Strategy and the Fat Smoker. And it does compare healthy eating and healthy habits for your body to strategy, and saying, you know what? We all know that certain things, we all know that you shouldn't smoke. But that first week after you quit smoking is really, really unpleasant, really terrible. You can see the goal in the future that you'll be a healthier person, but in that first week, it's just very difficult. And what David Meister, the man who writes this book, says is that when you make a big organizational change, like moving from an old kind of communication and content creation structure to a new one, it's going to be really uncomfortable at first, and it's going to be hard, because you have to break your old habits and behaviors and start all new ones that feel uncomfortable. When you just want to go back and say, let's do it the easy way, the way we used to do it before, and we can't do that. So what the rest of this presentation is going to be about is just basically, what are organizations doing while they're making that change? What are the things that you can do to make your organization put out healthy, snackable content and not the junk food? No ghetto fries for any of you. So there's 10 of them. So we'll go through them fairly quickly. They've only given me 30 minutes. So the first thing is to be strategic. And when people think about having a strategy, I don't know if it's the same in Europe, but in the US, people often think about having a strategy and the word plan are the same thing. And when they talk about planning, they're talking about, on next Tuesday, we will have 3 tweets, and they will be on these topics. And then on Wednesday, they're going to have these things. That's not what I'm talking about right now. I'm talking about something that's different. I'm talking about a real strategy as opposed to a plan. What the picture of the lighthouse here is because when I think of strategy and content strategy, particularly for short, shareable pieces of content, you have to think of it as sort of a long-term goal, sort of a light in the distance that you're shooting towards. The lighthouse, the strategy sort of guides the work you're doing without any particulars in it. So we know that we're steering towards the port, we're going towards the lighthouse, or we're trying to avoid the rocks, whatever. But we don't have a specific plan. We have a bunch of flexibility. So when I say we need to be strategic, we need to have a long-term vision or values for what the content is going to be, and be very flexible within that. So Henry Mintzberg says, smart strategists appreciate they cannot be smart enough to think through everything in advance. So have that long-term strategy, the vision, have everyone aligned on what your content is supposed to do. So if you have a Twitter feed, and the goal of it is, the strategy is, we want to make sure our customers can use our products effectively, because one of our business goals is retaining our customers. That's as much strategy as you need. You may need, a little bit more guidelines on here's how our voice sounds, here's the kinds of words we use. But after that, let the people who do the content do the work, because they're going to have to respond and adapt as the things change around them. The strategy has to be, they talk about in chaos theory, how you have to have enough structure to make people feel confident that they can do their work, but enough flexibility that they can find new innovative ways to do their work. That's what we're looking here for a strategy. So have some sort of point in the distance that you're shooting towards. Oftentimes I see clients jump into something like social media or blogging with no goal at all, except for our competitor is doing this. We should do it too. And that's not enough. We need to figure out what exactly is the purpose of every piece of content you're putting out there. Now, not every individual piece, but why are we having this channel of communication? What are we steering towards? And that's what I mean by be strategic. Oops. Be balanced. So this in the United States is what the government sends out to everyone and says, here's what your meals should look like. This is what you should eat. You have a whole bunch of vegetables and fruits, some grains, and some dairy. Now for me, I'm from an area of the country that all we do is dairy, so mine's like the whole plate is dairy, but that's not healthy. But so when we talk about content in a similar way, we have to remember that when people talk about content, they often talk about the content itself. What is the content about, that substance? What are you talking about? Structure, how is it formatted? What channel is it in? So most of the time when people think about creating content, those are the two things they think of. We have the strategy that we were talking about in the middle. But the parts that they forget to think about, the other side of the balance, is the people components. So workflow, how do you get the content created? Who in your organization creates it? How much time do they have to do that? And governance, how do we make sure that the content stays at a very high quality? How do we govern the content? How do we make the rules and decisions about it? So when I talk about being balanced, what I'm talking about is not just talking about these content things. They are very important, the content components, what's it about and how is it structured. But whenever you think about how you're going to create content, also thinking about who's going to create it? How are you going to make decisions about it to make sure that your content stays healthy? Then we have be aware. I talk a lot to organizations about being aware of their content ecosystem. And that means being aware of both the internal and external factors that impact the content you're going to create. External factors we think about a lot. What are your competitors doing? What are the thought leaders in your industry doing? What are your customers looking for, or your users, whoever's going to your site? What are they looking for? What do they want? But we also have to think about the internal ecosystems in our organization. How are the business goals changing? How is the content going to help us achieve those business goals? Who can do the work, as I was saying, with workflow and governance? How many people do we have? Sure, it would be great if we had 16 blogs, but we don't have enough people to work on those. How many can we do realistically and do well? So that's when I'm talking about being aware, being very aware of our surroundings. Particularly, particularly, we need to remember that we're having a dialogue with our customers. When we're talking about shareable content, we need to think about what do they want to talk about? What do they want to share with their friends? And if we don't pay any attention to that, no one's going to want to share your content. So going along with that, be targeted. This is a website for people who like to do baked goods. And it is a community of 12,000 people who are very interested in that topic. It's created by, you can't tell this, but it's created by a major flour manufacturer in the United States. So, it looks very organic, but what they're trying to do is, create some interest in baking. But what they're doing quite well, actually, is looking at what does this user group what are they really interested in? What are the trends? What are some of the controversies? Because when you think about things that are very relevant to the conversation, things that all of these people understand and are meaningful to them, when you talk about those topics, you're going to be able to get your content shared a lot easier. Also, the more you stay involved in the conversation with the users, and the more targeted you get to the specific user types, the better you can pinpoint what they want to hear and what kind of content you want to produce. So this man, Brad Cohen at Jesse, he's one of the people who talks the most about snackable content. I think he may have even made up the term. I'm not sure on that. But he says when you're putting together this, if you want to be shareable content, you need to give out content that, first of all, is instantly recognizable by people. And also, it references something, an experience that they've already had. So baking people, we don't have to start talking from the beginning about, well, you need flour and butter, and they know that already. We want to reference experiences they already have, be part of the club, talk to that very targeted, specific group of people with content that meets their needs. So he's saying to create deeper meaning through references to shared stories and experiences. That's a very important part. So be generous. People talk, like I said earlier, a lot about snackable content, but you can't just send out tweets and short little blog posts and expect that's going to build all of your company's reputation. Individuals can kind of get away with that if you're just promoting your own personal brand or blog. But organizations people want to know a bit more than just those little snacks. That the snacks may be the thing that attracts them to your company, makes them aware of your company. But eventually, if they're really considering buying your product or your service, or engaging with you if you're a news service or something like that, signing up, putting money out, they're going to want to know a bit more. They're going to want to do a little bit more research. So all of that snackable content for an organization needs to have a bit more hefty content behind it. So we want to not just give them snacks in between their meals, we want to give them an option to have the whole meal as well. A big, healthy, hefty whole meal that they can go and see. As I said earlier, not all shareable content is little. When, this is a fairly old reference, but when Bill Clinton and Monica Lewinsky had their scandal, maybe, 15 years ago, 10 years ago, there was a PDF that went out with the report about what happened. It was 350 pages long. It was the most downloaded PDF on the internet for like 5 years. People shared it and they were like, go to page 68. That's where the fun begins. So it doesn't have to be short to be shareable. So make sure that if you are doing these little short pieces of content, your organization has something meaty behind it that you can give them when they go to the next level, when they have the next level of interest in your organization. And one of the things, this is just a stat, but talking about how when people are shopping, most of the time they're online, they're doing research. The communication atmosphere right now is that everyone does an extensive amount of research before they make any decisions. Those little snackable pieces, they'll help. But getting that big full meal in is sort of the research they crave before they're going to make a real tangible decision, particularly if it's about spending a lot of money or a business-to-business situation. So be proactive. Another thing that I see a lot of clients doing is sort of sitting back and waiting for it all to come to them, they'll put a blog out and they'll just leave it there and say, oh, I hope that works. Somebody will see it and it'll go viral immediately. That doesn't happen. So you need to start reaching out to people. If you're going to start putting out, if your goal is really to have shareable content that gets dispersed around the internet, it's not going to do it by itself. It's not going to do it just sitting there. So you need to go out and promote your content. Put it on different message boards. You need to reach out, do guest blogs on other people's platforms. So that can be really hard if you're an organization that's used to owning all of your content and keeping it to yourself and not letting anybody else touch it. In some cases, you have to go to your industry bloggers. Who are they? Just guys sitting in chairs somewhere, and say, can we do an interview? Can I post something on your blog? And that's very nerve-wracking for a lot of organizations to sort of let go of that control. But it really helps get your content shared and get more people having attention to the stuff that you want them to see in the end. The other thing is that as Bjorn said at the beginning, technology is changing the way content is structured. And if you have a content management system already, whether it's a good or bad one, you have different buckets you can put content in. As content management systems mature, they're allowing us to sort of move the pieces of content around. So instead of putting a whole article in one piece of your content management system, the more mature content management systems are letting you put the beginning, the lead paragraph in one spot, with maybe some bullet point details in another place, then some areas of body content, so that when we publish it, those pieces of content can live on their own, not just in that article format, and they can move around and become little snackable pieces of content themselves. Now, whether or not your organization has a content management system that allows you to do that today, you can do some things that will help in the future when your organization does get to that point. And as we talked about, putting metadata in, is everybody familiar with the term metadata? Okay. Putting a lot of great metadata into your, along with your content will help no matter how far along in the content management system is, because as it improves, the metadata can help you, help the content live on and have more flexibility. The other thing is that we need to make sure that our content is, so we have over here the little structured content piece over there. And responsive design, making sure that your content is flexible enough that it can move and flex depending on what kind of device it's looking at. A lot of organizations aren't being very proactive about that. They're just sitting back and thinking everybody's still looking at their desktops, and they're not. So be flexible. Chris Zucker, this is a fantastic article about creative destruction, but it says, we're entering a period where extinction of the slow, inflexible, and bureaucratic is about to happen in record numbers. So creative destruction is a economic term for for new things to happen, old things have to be destroyed. So back to what we were talking about at the beginning, our old communication structures, we're going to have to change them. We're going to have to sort of blow them up so that we can work in this new era of content organizations. So one of the things is that I see a lot of times with clients, again, back to that sort of ownership and clinging to things, is that they have sort of the content police. They have the people who are there to make sure that every, that the company's name is in the first line of every sentence of every article, and that all of the legal things all the ducks are in a row, and things are said just so. One of the things that we recommend to our clients is, like I said earlier, get a vision in place, get some guidelines in place, and then hire people you can trust to make decisions on their own without a big chain of command. And that's what this quote is about. Don't plan your future, plan your people, because the people are going to have to adapt, and organizations are going to have to be a bit more flexible. And that's something that people who are doing healthy, snackable, shareable content do very, very well, is that they give autonomy, they give rights over to the employees within the organization. And whether or not your organization is going to let you do that right now, that's a question, but you can start edging a little bit closer and closer to that sort of future state as you work. So strategic routines, not plans. Start getting people to understand, here's basically how content works in our organization. Here's just a little diagram of it. This is actually a complicated one. But just get in the routine of here's how content is being produced, so we don't have to look at our project plan and get every little step outlined and ironed out and make sure that everybody's had the right sign off. No, just get a routine underway. Then you don't have to have the detailed editorial plan anymore. You have a routine. You can say, hey, I have an idea about this piece of content. Let's go through the routine, instead of saying, let's go through the plan. So be authentic. One thing that people who do healthy, shareable content do really, really well, or organizations do really well, is that they let human beings write their own content. So instead of coming from the big corporate voice, this is what IBM has to say to you, they say, okay, 8 of our executives or our thought leaders within the organization, you have a blog, it's written in your voice, not IBM's voice, but it refers to our products and to the things we're looking for. So instead of business-to-business communication, they're talking about person-to-person communication. Because people don't necessarily trust organizations anymore, but they do trust people that they get to know. And the content sounds a lot more real if it comes from a human being, rather than coming from a big corporate voice, where it sounds all very staid and corporate sounding. So people-to-people communications, let people talk to each other, and don't be afraid to let different people in your organization have slightly different variations on the corporate voice. So the person who's talking in the technical areas may have talk with a lot more technical terminology if they're doing software selling or something like that. There may be a lot more technical words that they use versus somebody who is on blogging from a marketing perspective, who may have a more utilitarian vocabulary. So let people talk on their own. And this is saying that any consistency across those different voices should be organic, based on the company's values and the business goals of the organization. So you don't have to have those necessarily ironclad style rules as you once did as a corporate organization for these blogs and shareable pieces of content. You still might want to have that for your corporate website and the things that you can absolutely control. But for those shareable pieces, let them have a shared value system instead of a shared voice. Be Flawsome. So Flawsome is a term coined by a company called Trend Watching. But what it means is flaws plus awesome equals Flawsome. And what they're talking about is that because we're having to produce so much content so quickly, and we're not having the tight rein on the employees as much as we used to be, we're letting them have their own voice and their own blogs and their own tweets, that sometimes things are going to get messed up. There's going to be mistakes made. Things are going to go out that the organization might cringe a little bit at. And what the research has shown is that people like that. Users as a whole like that. They like to see the company mess up as long as they make up for it and as long as they apologize and fix it. Because it makes them seem, particularly with flexible and shareable content, it makes them seem more human. And more human is more trustworthy. So a bunch of research has recently shown that if you screw up and you fix it, your brand positioning actually goes up. Your reputation goes up a little bit, as long as it's not, a terrible, humanitarian problem or something. But if you just send out a tweet that's incorrect and you fix it later, actually people think that's a good thing. So it's okay to be flawsome. It's okay to make mistakes. And getting corporate brands to think that's all right is like pulling teeth. And then the last one is be measured. So be measured means when we are talking about content in general, for the last 15 years that I've worked on the internet, people have often measured, how's the home page doing? We did some tests last Tuesday, and here's the results we got. They look at one piece of content on one day using one kind of test. Maybe it's a user test, maybe it's analytics. The users don't work that way. They look at a whole bunch of content on a whole bunch of different days. And doing one test, one kind of test, is not going to get you a full view of content itself. So when I talk about being measured, that means measuring your content success regularly, using a lot of different methods to do it. So maybe you use a usability test, some user research, some analytics. You talk to your salespeople, find out if they're seeing any complaints about the content or anything good comments about the content. And you put all of that together to have a sort of complete measurement picture. And you don't just measure one piece of the website. You measure content systems. So we want to make sure that the content is performing well over the long term. Because like we said earlier, there might be mistakes day to day. How is it working over 6 months? Are we getting a bump? Not just how'd that one tweet do? How'd that one white paper do? But how's all of the content working together to help us, over a longer period of time, have a better brand rating? So all of these things I've talked about, they're not necessarily easy, and you might not be able to implement all of them right today, but the more you can sort of edge your organization closer to them, the better off you'll be. And that's the end of that. So.
Still waiting? No.
Yeah.
Thank you, Melissa. Very inspiring. So we really have to think of, as I asked you at the beginning, we really have to think of on how we do the content management.
Yes.
So what do you think is, because at the moment still we, in a lot of organizations, there's still a distinguishment between those people who are doing communications, external communications on those networks, and who are creating the formal content part.
Yes.
And then on the other side, you got also, especially for the internet projects, you got then the web content management people who are, well, doing the operative stuff and providing the content on the website. So with this approach to snackable content, is there a way we need to change also this distinguishment?
Yeah,
because now everybody needs to communicate it.
That's right. And one of the things that I see a lot of organizations doing just in the last year is actually combining, or sort of the people who are at the head of this space, combining their internet and their online components, even the technologists, with communication and putting them under the same leader. So you see that sort of organically happening where they're realizing, okay, all this stuff has to be together. But additionally, it's people throughout the entire organization have to sort of be aligned on how content is created. So yeah, absolutely, things are going to, the traditional structure of organizations with the communications team here and a web team here and the product team here, that's changing quite significantly. And the people, when you talk about content, where does content live? Content lives in all of those places. And so some organizations are taking the route where they'll actually make a content strategy department, and that is sort of a neutral, that works with the technology and the product people and things like that. And other people just, it doesn't matter what you call it, but one area of the organization just takes the lead on that work. But it's very, you have to do a lot of outreach. It has to be a very dynamic group of people that do that work. It can't just be territorial people who are sitting there trying to get everything done in their own little thing and not letting anyone else have a piece.
When you are advising organization on this way, what is your suggestion what to do first?
The suggestion that often happens is, well, how it often happens is they say, we want 300 new pieces of content. And we say, okay, who's going to do that? And they say, I don't know. And we start working from that piece of pain where they say, well, this person is the one who knows it, but they don't want, they're too busy to write things. And we start to figure out how those things are all webbed together and show them, this is not working. It's not going to work, and it's never going to work, so we need to change things a little bit differently. So we usually start from the point that they're having trouble with, and then go backwards. And the first thing we tell them to do is sort of prioritize the audience. Because oftentimes they'll say, oh, our web, it's for the public. It's for all the customers. And then you'll have the people in human resources saying, no, it's for new employees. And the people over here saying, no, it's for our existing customers. And say, no, let's put them in order. This piece of content, who's the number one user? No ties. You guys just, and then we step back and let them argue. And when they start having to sort of prioritize things and realize who's going to work on them, it usually becomes really clear that the structure needs to change. And then we start figuring out who's going to be the middleman, who's going to be the joiner person.
Ich darf nochmal aufrufen zum Fragen stellen und wir haben schon die erste Frage.
Hi, Nina from Denmark. I'm from an engineering company, a consultant company, and we've tried doing that. And I think the greatest challenge is the joining person.
Yes.
Because we've tried to have some of our consultants blog, and they're engineers, and they're not born with communication skills, most of them.
Yeah. My husband's an engineer, so I can go with that, yeah.
And then we have people from the communications department, but they don't know enough about bridges and tunnels and so on to blog about it.
Yes.
They can write a very nice article about it if they interview one of these engineers, but
Right.
they can't blog and tweet about it because they just don't know enough about the content.
Yeah.
And when we do the blogging and so on, we want to do it for an audience that are interested in tunnels and bridges,
Yes.
and either they decide things about whether to build a new tunnel, or they are actually on the customer side, but knowing very much about it. So it has to be very specific. It has to come from someone who knows something about it. So I think that's the biggest challenge, actually, because it takes a lot of time. If every time you need to blog or tweet, you have to join these two people, one from the communication and the engineer.
Yeah, there's a couple things in there. Is one, if they're engineers talking to other engineers, it might be okay if they're not that great at communication. It really is. I mean, that's when we're talking about that human voice and a little bit of flossom. It's okay.
But some of them don't talk at all.
Yeah, I understand.
I think the best we have done is to actually ask a lot of them and then see if there's 1 in 100 that likes to communicate.
That's what I was going to say. Ask for the volunteer.
That actually likes to communicate.
Yeah.
Then he's probably the best. He might not be the best engineer, but if he likes to communicate, he's our best bet.
Right, exactly. And training is actually really useful.
Yeah, yeah.
So putting in a corporate content or communication training program, which doesn't have to be hard. It can be 2 days a year. But just giving some basic guidelines on here's how you write, here's the kinds of topics we're looking for, here's why we're looking for those things can be really useful. And another thing that there's, having a mentoring program. Yeah. If somebody volunteers to start a new blog and they're very technical or not very good at communicating or whatever, having for maybe the first 3 months that they blog, having them work with someone else and then set them free on their own once they've sort of graduated. Or if after 3 months it's not working, it's not going to work, and we'll find someone else. Thank you for trying very much. But yeah.
New skills is the biggest challenge, I think.
I think that's true.
Weitere Rückfragen?
Hi, I'm a journalist from an IT magazine here in Switzerland. And when you talk together, when you work together with a company, they have like a real structured, piece point of view, and they're like afraid of doing mistakes and everything. How hard is it for you to really change them? And do you really succeed in most of the cases? Do they really change, or do they just like stay?
Yeah.
In their old structures.
Yeah, it depends on the organization, and sometimes even just a little bit of movement goes a long way. One of the things that we talk about a lot with our clients is, okay, I understand that you're comfortable with this structure, and this is how you would like to stay. Here are the risks that you're going to have by doing that. Here are the opportunities you're going to miss out on by doing that. And when they see those things, sometimes they're a little bit more swayed. Not always, but sometimes. At least to go just a little bit further. Most of the times it's not like we walk in and then the whole company changes around us, right? We just try and say, okay, for the next year, let's try and go this far. That's why we're talking about that long-term strategy. It might not happen tomorrow, but let's see how far we can edge it on. How can we just do a little bit more? Let's just try one blogger. Let's just try one. Can you go with just one? And so they'll usually let us do experiments. And then if we can show positive results from the experiments, we get a little bit more latitude. So little short projects that can show some progress and good results are usually our weapons in that fight.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Melissa.